Hey, it's Helen Smith here. Welcome to The Briefing. Kevin Rudd versus Julia Gillard. Two Labor leaders, two Prime Ministers, and one political party that simply couldn't stop stabbing itself in the back. Let's get into it. This beef starts back in 2007. John Howard has been Prime Minister for what seemed like forever, almost 12 years to be exact, and Australia is desperate for change. They want someone who gets it. Enter Kevin 07. He's slick, smart, selling hope, progress, and broadband internet that actually works. And by his side as deputy is Julia Gillard, the perfect political partner. Together, they're Labor's dream team. Rudd's the strategist and Gillard's the negotiator. And in a landslide victory, they sweep the Howard government out of power in late 2007, with Rudd becoming the 26th Prime Minister of Australia. The Labor Party taking the win for the first time since 1996, and Julia Gillard reaching the highest executive position ever held by a woman in the Australian government. Pretty impressive.
I, Kevin Michael Rudd, do swear that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people in the office of Prime Minister, so help me God.
But the high of their success didn't last long. By all accounts, life inside Kevin Rudd's office was intense. Rumours began to swirl that the man who so triumphantly led Labor to victory was allegedly impossible to work with. We're talking late-night phone calls, last-minute speech rewrites, ministers feeling iced out, and a questionable temper.
And tell these kids in the embassy to just give me simple sentences. This language, he just complicates it.
And this sense that every decision, big or small, had to go straight to the boss himself, which got commentators at the time describing his leadership style as very hands-on, with one even calling him a classic micromanager who liked to keep an eye on, well, everything. And then in 2008, Rudd got the nickname Captain Chaos by the media, so evidently things were not so great. But we also can't ignore some of the Rudd government's most notable achievements, including the First Nation apology to Australia's Indigenous peoples for the stolen generations, and Rudd's response to the 2008 financial crisis that resulted in Australia becoming one of the only developed countries to avoid the Great Recession. But among these scores, there were also what many still call one of the biggest blunders of his career, shelving his admissions trading scheme, his flagship climate policy that was the centrepiece of his agenda and one of the promises that helped him get elected in the first place. And the backflip drew criticism from inside his own party, disappointed the public, and handed his opposition, led by Tony Abbott at the time, an absolute field day of taunting material.
Mr. Rudd has just said that you can't walk away from a price on carbon. But that's precisely what you did, Kevin.
The party wasn't happy, the public felt let down, and suddenly Kevin 07 didn't look so untouchable anymore. The polls nosedived. And at this stage, Labor's staring down the barrel of an election annihilation. And deep inside the Labor Party, the factional power brokers start whispering about one possible solution. Enter Julia Gillard. Now, according to Gillard, she was reluctant, but by the evening of June 23, 2010, those same senior Labor figures had quietly began canvassing support for a leadership challenge, with sources telling the media the final catalyst came from inside Rudd's own office, with his chief of staff sounding out the backbench. And then, at 10:30 p.m. that night, Kevin Rudd called a leadership ballot, saying Gillard had given him two options: to resign as PM or battle it out. But before the vote could even happen, he pulled out of the race and resigned.
I hope I've been able to demonstrate to you that this has been a very busy 2.5 years.
Julia Gillard becomes Australia's first female Prime Minister.
Can I say to the Australian people, there will be some days I delight you, there may be some days I disappoint you. On every day, I will be working my absolute hardest for you.
So what happened to Kevin 07? Well, his sudden and spectacular downfall made him the first Labor Prime Minister to be dumped from office before completing a first term. But he did stay in politics. We'll get into that a little later. Now, moving forward to August 2010, Julia Gillard calls an election, but it goes badly. Labor barely scrapes into minority government. She's Prime Minister, but she's wounded, and the pressure is on, including from her former right-hand man, Kevin Rudd, who's slyly sitting on the backbench after Gillard made him the Minister for Foreign Affairs. And for the next 18 months, the leaks against Gillard began, and the beef really started to heat up, with anonymous sources attempting to destabilise the government. Now, everyone assumes it's coming from Camp Rudd, but no one can prove it. And Julia's trying to govern, trying to pass policy, but every single day there's another story. Is Rudd coming back? Gillard in trouble, sources say, etc., etc. It's the psychological political warfare every politician dreads, and it starts working, but not just for Julia. In February 2012, in the midst of official government business in Washington, D.C., whispers and accusations against Rudd start, accusing him of disloyalty. And then Kevin Rudd resigns as foreign minister from his hotel room in Washington, D.C., jumps back on a plane to Australia to challenge Julia Gillard for her leadership. The gloves are off. He doesn't hold back, saying this in his speech. Rightly or wrongly, Julia has lost the trust of the Australian people. And starting on Monday, I want to begin restoring that trust. I want to finish the job the Australian people elected me to do back in 2007. And in response, Julia Gillard goes on TV and defends herself. She talks about Rudd's chaotic leadership and how he can't unite the party. It's pretty brutal.
My purpose, the Labor Party purpose, is about serving the nation's interests. And I've called the leadership ballot because I believe it is in the interests of the nation to get this resolved. Australians are rightly sick of it, and that is why I have determined that the matter will be resolved on Monday.
And Gillard's ministers go even harder. Treasurer Wayne Swan, who'd worked with Rudd since the 1980s, calls him dysfunctional and says that he doesn't hold Labor's values. Tony Burke says the stories about the chaos, the temperament, the inability to have decisions made, they are not stories. And Nicola Roxon says she couldn't work with him again. It's a full cabinet pile-on, and then the votes happen. The results are in. Rudd loses 71-31. It's not even close. And Julia fronts the press and says, the leadership issue is settled. This is truly over. Spoiler alert, it was not over. Kevin Rudd stays in Parliament again, and his supporters are still trying to destabilise Julia's government. But she's booked and busy, creating huge initiatives like the NDIS, Gonski education funding, carbon pricing, and also gave this now iconic speech in response to the opposition leader, Tony Abbott, accusing her of sexism.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man. I will not. And the government will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man. Not now, not ever.
But nobody's talking about that. They're all too busy talking about the leadership feud between Rudd and Gillard. And so, in March 2013, Julia Gillard has had enough. She calls yet another leadership battle and dares Kevin to run. He doesn't, and she wins unopposed, saying this is it. But despite this, the polls kept getting worse. Labor's heading for a wipeout, and the caucus panics and Rudd returns on June 26, 2013. 3 years and 2 days after Julia knifed Kevin, Kevin knifes her back. He challenges, and this time he wins. Kevin Rudd is Prime Minister again. Julia walks out of Parliament and never comes back. But Rudd only gets about 10 weeks or so as PM before Labor loses the election to Tony Abbott, and he resigns immediately. Both Gillard and Rudd have left Canberra. But to no one's surprise, the beef continues, popping back up in both of their tell-all memoirs. Kevin calls Julia's book a great contribution to Australian fiction, while Julia says Kevin was impossible to work with, saying he'd physically intimidate people in meetings and stepped into their space in what she called a bullying encounter. She's even suggested his fragility stemmed from his childhood, a view that Rudd himself clapped back at.
I haven't seen Julia's university qualifications as a psychoanalyst.
But But as much as this feud destroyed the Labor Party, it also seemed to somehow help show them what not to do, because since then, the party has presented a mostly united front. So Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard were two pretty damn good politicians who could have been remembered as legends for various policies, but instead became a cautionary tale of what happens when personal ambition overshadows the greater good. Which brings us to now, with US President Donald Trump saying this about Kevin Rudd, who's currently Australia's ambassador to the US.
Did an ambassador say something bad about it? Don't tell me. I don't. Where is he? Is he still working for you?
Yeah.
You said bad?
Before I took this position, Mr. President.
I don't like you either. I don't, and I probably never will.
Now that's a beef for another time, but that's it for today's episode of The Beefing on Julia Gillard versus Kevin Rudd. If you like this episode, we'd love it if you could share it with someone else who you think might enjoy it as well. It's a really easy way you can support everything we do here at The Briefing, and you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and on YouTube. I'm Helen Smith. Catch you next time.